Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. This is Raphaëlle here, and it's a pleasure and honor to be with you today to go to our webinar on Agile Innovation and Upscaling. So my name is Raphaëlle O'Connor, and I am the owner of a company called inewtrition, and I'm very fortunate today that I am joined by Arjen van der Wijk, along with Declan and Siobhan, to talk to you about Agile Upscaling and innovation. And we are going to go through a number of different slides. So I would like to really welcome you all. We have part 1 today and we have part 2 in 2 weeks' time. So we are hoping for a very interactive discussion with you, really welcoming your questions, your comments. And we have a few polls as well that we would like to throw at you, so to speak, and get some of your feedback and engagement throughout the webinar. So you're all very welcome. And with that, I'm just going to introduce you to Arjen, who is our guest speaker today, and with whom it's been a pleasure to collaborate to prepare this webinar for you.
Well, thank you, Raphaëlle, for the warm introduction, and of course for the chance to do this together with you and the opportunity to organize this. It's a pleasure. I think we have put quite some effort in the preparation, and I'm really proud of the end result that we have, especially concentrating around the Food Ingredients Europe exhibition next week. And of course, the second part of the webinar we will have the week after, giving us the opportunity together not only to meet us in person, Raphaëlle, but also to have meetings with people in Frankfurt area, if possible, next week. Thanks. So a little bit of introduction from my side. I can call myself a Swiss Army knife in food innovation, especially in the part of upscaling, having a background of mechanical engineering and quite a history of working at technical related companies and procurement and supply chain. And later on, I became a self-employed professional, moved into the food industry, and actually never left because it's so much fun to do that. So what are we going to talk about today? As Raphaëlle introduced, part 1 is on the agenda. We will tackle 4 topics, like a general introduction on agile upscaling, the purpose of the story of innovation, and the things that are, let's say, companies engaging with pitfalls, challenges, and so on. Talk about the audience, so who's the client you might serve to and send your concept and products to, determining the setup of your supply chain. And of course, we will tackle some challenges along the way which you might face when upscaling your concept. Second part will be a webinar exactly 2 weeks after this one, so 1 week after the FE exhibition, and then we will go more into depth in the route to market. So for today, the product to market, and then it will be the route to market. All about, okay, how to design that supply chain, find co-manufacturers, and of course, make sure you onboard and launch with the right one. But that's for later concern. For today, the goal is to tell you a little bit more about upscaling in general. So what comes along with manufacturing, processing, and switching actually the innovation from the basic research and development into really a tangible commercial product. So some challenges we will discuss as well. It's also a little bit of a clash / a battle, which we try to make in this webinar together with Raphaëlle, with her extensive experience also from innovation point of view and our point of view when it comes to the technical part of upscaling. So we'll touch also the roadmap to launching, what comes along. It involves also things like a make or buy assessment, topics like how to protect your IP, not to the stage where you have to involve expensive lawyers, but more in a practical way. And of course, all kinds of questions. Happy to answer those. The thing is, we have quite an audience today. I think we have more than 100 people attending the webinar. It will get quite messy if we have to answer all the questions in between. Although I like to have an interactive discussion, we tend to have all the questions and answers built to the end, unless it's really essential. Now we have 2 moderators here who will keep track on these. So questions welcome, obviously. A little bit more about Cibus Nexum and the background. Located in the Food Valley region in the Netherlands, close to Wageningen University. And nice to know is Cibus Nexum, or Cibus Nexum, is Latin for food and connection, basically describing what we are doing. This is an example of the clients we have been working for and still do. So far on the left, some corporates and brands we're doing projects for on different types of and commercial models as well. And on the right side, I think more relevant for today, high growth startups, innovators, and all kinds of interesting companies on their way to upscaling with their innovative concepts. Perhaps you might recognize some. Some are the local, really local Dutch startups, but also some very well-known European and US startups and scale-ups. Some examples of achievements of projects that we have been doing so far, just to show you along the route of our food flow method how these products and projects are being handled, from just a small benchmark until a full end-to-end launch of a peanut butter project in the American market. The disadvantage of this slide is I can only show CPG products which actually land on the shelf, and of course we also do a lot of other very interesting innovative projects like Formo and Project Eden and so on. However, I cannot showcase the examples because of confidentiality reasons, of course. But this is more of an example which is really tangible, present in the supermarket. So I would like to give this one back to Raphaëlle, please.
Thank you, Arjen. Building on your previous slide around the design, that's exactly where my area of experience and expertise lies. My background is very much in food science and food technology. And from that, I have spent many years looking at consumer-centric innovation, also how companies can innovate in this space, whether it is on the product design, but also some of those new ingredients or emerging technologies to address specific health benefits. My area of interest is very much around what we call precision nutrition. And again, looking at what are the bioactive ingredients or molecules that are relevant to address specific conditions. And also a lot of work around end-to-end lifecycle management and project management support around product design. And at some point, when we have a strong product and a good idea on the process, we obviously need to collaborate hand in hand with people like Arjen to look at the scale-up and manufacturing of those type of products. So this is really the context in which this webinar is taking place, giving you a perspective on the risk, giving you a perspective on the different steps that are involved, and how to ask yourself the right question to set up your business for success, not only during the development, but also for the sustainable commercial manufacture of your product.
Exactly. Thanks, Raphaëlle, for this clarification on that's also the, let's say, the environment we're in and the starting point. So now we'll touch these 4 topics of the introduction, the purpose, the audience, and later on challenges. Starting with introduction to agile upscaling. We call it agile upscaling because I think that is a word that fits good with the current conditions in the market, where flexibility, speed to market are very relevant. So we'll touch the roadmap, TRL, which is an abbreviation for technology readiness level, versus, okay, what kind of manufacturing setup will it be? Make or buy, of course. And of course, also a little bit about, okay, what is co-manufacturing? What does it mean, actually? And of course, some advantages. So let's jump into the first chapter of introduction. And I think this is a nice one, Raphaëlle. Can you clarify a little bit the starting point? Because I stole this picture from your slide deck, which actually adds up great to this presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And I stole it from someone else, actually, with a reference here at the bottom, because I think it's very fair that people's work is being represented and referenced properly. So this is an excellent visual to explain the overlap between the work that I do and what Arjen does as well. And we can understand that the complexity of a new product and a new process requires a multidisciplinary team. We have our regulatory, operation, finance, and here we're trying to get some perspective as to how those different disciplines need to collaborate and work together to support the end-to-end product development, scale, and commercialization. So just a quick kind of snapshot of how marketing, product design, process development, and production need to collaborate very closely together, and what is their involvement at different stages of the process. So as you can see at the beginning, people like myself would really take on a lot of the heavy lifting to support the design of the product. And as we are going from left to right, at some point, there is a handover and a transition. Some people call it technology transfer, others call it new product introduction. And then we hand it over to people who may have more of an operational or maybe engineering mindset and understanding of scaling up and commercial manufacture of a product. So this is just an excellent kind of snapshot to understand the overlap, the synergy, and the collaboration that is required across different disciplines to minimize risk and to ensure a successful innovation process for a project around the food and beverage industry.
Thank you, Raphaëlle. What I like about this sheet is product design in the beginning has quite a big portion of the total graph, where this might have to do with, let's say, the pull from the market when it comes to certain needs and consumers and trends. What I see nowadays as well is the portion of process development is on the beginning a little bit bigger with these innovative startups, and we can obviously see some examples in the trade show next week where they start off with more a push approach, and the process development from the beginning is much more bigger. And later on, they will start thinking about, okay, how could this end up in certain applications towards the final client and final audience? So, to my opinion, this graph is a snapshot, but it can be different and, of course, dynamic in different situations. Great, thank you. So let's continue about the discussion with the roadmap to launch. What we try to do with this slide is on the left side, tackle some topics which are relevant for you as a brand, as an innovator, as a company bringing products to life. On the right side, topics which are relevant from manufacturing point of view. And they don't necessarily need to clash, but they are, let's say, colliding and having interaction with each other. For instance, on the recipe, if you have developed something great in the laboratory and you're ready to upscale, you have to consider different types of equipment. It has an influence on the processing. Same, for instance, as the packaging or the raw material. We have certain thoughts on very specific pack and raw material. Switching to a more industrial environment, that will change. The sourcing of that will, for instance, also change. So some examples of how to, tackle that, and in any case, know of it, what will happen at some point in the route. Now we come to a very interesting slide. There's a lot of text, but I think it's really relevant, and we have discussed it previously in preparation with Raphaëlle as well. We thought it was an interesting one to include in this webinar because it clearly shows the route in development you're showing from research and ideation via development and validation to final deployment and launch and securitization. And what we have added to the technology readiness level on the left side, a more widened description of at what stage is the innovation there at that point in time, what has been achieved, and what kind of facility or size of facility could match with that level. And this is a slide which we always use in the design stage of our projects to see, okay, what is the stage you're in? And how does that determine the design of the supply chain of your concept later on? I won't go through all the details of every, but I think a few examples are interesting, like, for instance, the proof of concept, which marks sort of the end of research and ideation, and could already trigger customer needs or interest from the market, where you have then still a whole journey left to achieve the status of commercial product, where your technology will be demonstrated and actually feasible for further upscaling. And at that moment in time, you might enter into the situation that you might need a CDMO or a CMO, but also with some R&D capabilities, because you're not there yet, right? You need some support in the technical upscaling further. So any questions on this topic, happy to answer that, of course. This one is for you, Raphaëlle, on the innovation wheel and the key attributes.
Thank you. Again, maybe going a little bit more granular around the attributes and the indicators that are important to consider when we are looking at new product design, whether it is food or beverage, but also dietary supplements, which is an area that I think, is more and more expected from a consumer perspective. There is a lot of blurred boundaries across those functional foods, functional beverages, dietary supplements. I was just trying to, again, give a perspective of what are the key attributes that are on the table and need to be considered as part of the research and ideation phase that Arjen spoke about earlier, but also need to be thought about during the development phase. If we go through the wheel together, we have the texture. What are the different aspects of the texture that are important for a specific food product or a beverage? And this needs to fit into the brand. All the aspects around flavor and sensory experience also need to be taken into account. We all have the visual aspect of the product as well that is captured here under appearance. And then we have the nutrition and we have the taste. So just want to give you a little bit of a perspective of those parameters that need to be considered when we are talking about design. And what are the USPs, the unique selling points? What are the differentiators for your product, for your brand, for your company? And those are usually being discussed and assessed and set at the outset of the project. But when we talk about the end in mind and our target audience and our consumer, we need to ensure that we revisit those on a regular basis and that we are maintaining those differentiation points, those parameters consistently throughout the development, but also during scale up and commercialization. So again, just a snapshot that needs to be obviously defined and refined for a specific project or for a specific product, but it seems to be an interesting image to have an idea of all the different attributes that need to be taken into account at every point of time when we're involved in a project like that. And I think, it is important to understand that different processes will impact one versus the other. Different strategy will also have an impact on some of those aspects. So it is the balance and the synergy of all those different components that is going to give you a unique type of product and that is likely to increase your success rate for a specific project or for a specific business or for a specific product. So again, very keen and curious to get your perspective if you want to share your insights with us. But that was the easiest way I could start putting all of those thoughts together when I look at product design.
I think this is a great one because it captures a lot. And the interesting part here as well is once you are launching a product which needs to, let's say, capture the relevant things mentioned here, and you go back to the laboratory, there is a big world in between. You might reach the state of all these details that you admire and would like to incorporate in your product. At some point, you have to make a switch. We'll come back to that later. But there will be disturbance in the process. Once you go upscaling, things will change. And then the art will be in maintaining that and do the exercise again to see if it still fits the original purpose for your product. Thank you, Raphaëlle.
Yeah, thank you, Arjen. I think this slide also captures this mindset about identifying those parameters and those differentiators, and at the same time be extremely mindful that there are going to be some changes throughout the process of scaling and commercializing. So this is also captured in this slide here, where again, I'm trying to give an easy understanding of what are the different testing opportunities that we have, what are the different processes, and how the development is going to be scaled. So we can see here, going from left to right, that there are a lot of different steps and activities that need to take place when we are developing and scaling up and commercializing a product, and having this kind of end-to-end understanding, overview, and appreciation of how we are going to maintain some of those very important parameters, and at the same time take into account the fact that things will change over time. The process, our consumers, the quality of our raw material, all of those are going to somehow impact the end product. And the rule of the thumb that Arjen and I have been talking about quite a lot is the 80-20 rule, whereby, throughout those different steps, we try to validate our product or our process, but keeping in mind that there will be some changes going down the road. So I think, Arjen, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that, because you are the one who has, helped me to appreciate how there is no point to be too strict or stiff when we design a product, because we understand and know that things are going to change over time. So if that this 80-20 rule also applies to the type of project or work that you do?
Yeah, that is typically something that we see in practice, where some innovations are really designed till the finest detail. For instance, a very strict selection of a very specific ingredient. And then at some point, okay, you are, let's say, taking the big leap to bigger manufacturing, and you would like to rely on the sourcing and the buying power of a manufacturer, for instance. And let's say, okay, yeah, fine, the ingredient that you have been thinking about, I would like to involve my own products, because we cannot handle your specific ingredient in our logistics process. That's one example. Another one on this slide, which triggers me as well, is the yellow box of market testing and evaluation. Is at the end, where we might also think and we consider to do that a little bit earlier. For instance, when the pilot plant production is taking place, and we would be able already to find a manufacturer which has a pilot plant production facility, but already food grade, the output of successful trials at that point could also be used on top already with the consumer preference testing. Just again to validate concepts that you have been thinking of, but before you go to commercial plant production, actual further upscaling, you might have the opportunity to do some intermediate testing and adjust a little bit things. So yes, that gives a perfect guideline, and yes, indeed, we need to be apply some flexibility at some point, and it all depends with the type of manufacturing setup you will choose at some point. Wonderful, where these worlds collide. Thanks, Raphaëlle. I'd like to jump to the next slide. What I would like to show you here is the difference between the make situation or the buy. Make refers to you will produce it in your own facility. You invest a lot of money in stainless steel. I hope you find investors to support that. Nowadays, it can be quite difficult. Where the other option could be to start with co-manufacturing. With capital expenditure and building your own factory, at least you have to wait for a year because of the engineering, the lead times, and the building of it. And then you're stuck for a certain time on the fixed capacity. Where with co-manufacturing, you're much more flexible and agile. then at some point also the question could be the other way around. Okay, my volume is going through the roof. I have magnificent traction and revenue. At some point, you might reconsider the make or buy, because if you have such big volumes, then, for instance, after 3 or 5 years, it could become interesting again to build your own factory because you have those volumes. So staying agile, staying flexible, but we see in 95% of the cases that a startup or a new innovation is most feasible in hitting the market with a co-manufacturing setup. Just showing the red part, that's the part what remains, right? Once you're not investing your money in a facility in stainless steel, you can use that for further development and marketing purposes, for instance. Good. Outsourcing lingo. I would like to touch this topic as well. There are a lot of names about the topic of outsourcing. It can be called collaborative manufacturing or tolling. Tolling actually is the most simple variants of outsourcing your product. You ship some products to a company, they do their magic and send it back. Where we more tend to use the word co-manufacturing, and especially co because you do it together. And with new innovations, it's not just a retail tender for 1 year. We have a contract until the end of the year, and then in November we'll let you know what happens after it. It's about collaboration, because you might rely on their R&D facilities and knowledge and expert how to take care of quite some usual processes or simple things like freezing, storing, and distribution. So our, let's say, focus is on the word of co-manufacturing. Perhaps you have heard something about these words as well, or you're working in an organization which, for instance, uses the terminology of external manufacturing. Well, this is an example of, well, I think the ultimate form of co-manufacturing, which ends up with license manufacturing / joint ventures. And this is an example of Mondelez International, which is the owner of the Milka brand, and they collaborate with the company Arla Foods for the manufacturing, distribution, and the marketing. So also including the marketing, right? This is not just outsourcing a technical and logistical exercise. It's up and onto the marketing aspect as well. For instance, a company like Mövenpick do the same thing. They have a brand, a strong brand, and they choose their partners to make sure that they hit the shelves and they hit the clients with their brand, but the rest is taken care of by someone else. And there are a lot of different shades between doing everything yourself and doing with co-manufacturing. We'll come back to that. I think an interesting example of a co-manufacturing setup is this one. Now I see here the second poll popping up. Perhaps it's good to have a recap of the first poll, where we had a question of where to find the one that matches my requirement is the most voted question on the challenge, the biggest concern when outsourcing. So I like that one. Most of the time it's also, in this case also right IP, my IP will be lost. And these are typical concerns that we see popping up in the starting of a project or even before. So where to find, that's really a good one. And with the proper preparation, and we'll come back to that, of course, in part 2, I think this is something that can be easily tackled. Where to find, to add up a little bit about that, our experience is as well that a lot of startups and scale-ups start engaging with one company, and then at some point they end up in this funnel, and when it fails, there is a lot of time and energy wasted, and then you have to go back a lot of steps back in time to do it all over again. There are different ways to approach that. Let's dive into that. This one is on the project that we have done for Good Good. Good Good is a brand from Iceland and having already quite a significant market share in Europe, but especially in the US. And they engaged with our company from the Netherlands to find a co-manufacturer and co-develop also the product of this peanut butter. we like to use the example of peanut butter as well, because it might seem a very simple product, just some pressed peanut in a jar, right? But there's more to that, and I'll come back to that as well. The interesting thing here is initially we thought, okay, finding this co-manufacturer, obviously we had to look in the south of Europe, right? The wages are low. There has to be a manufacturer there who can do it economically the best. Ultimately, we ended up in the Netherlands with the most efficient factory, operating the facility with just 4 operators. Of course, these operators have high wages, but they have the less number of people in the factory. I think less than 50% of a regular factory in a traditional setup. So ending up in a factory in the Netherlands with the lowest cost level in the comparison we made. And it's now being successfully sold in the US in a lot of retail stores over there. Nice example of a project. And this is what I mentioned previously on the difference between producing a product yourself and the ultimate, well, that's mentioned below, like a JV, a joint venture, or a license fee. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to push the pause button now because I skipped the second poll. I think it would be good. Yeah, the perfect time to start exploring co-manufacturing. And then I will jump to the operating models. Thank you, Siobhan. Most people, the poll is still going on. Great to see that. Then I will tell a little bit more about this slide in the meantime. So the operating models showing the different layers of co-manufacturing, where from develop to pack and distribute, you have different stages, different steps in the process along the way. And outsourcing is not just a matter of handing over every activity to a third party. It can be a mixture. It can be also a hybrid model where, for instance, the brand or the innovator is taking care of the innovation, the actual sourcing of ingredients, for instance, and then the co-manufacturer will take care of the processing steps. Or it could also be an interesting one, and then we touch the topic of IP as well. You might consider to do the semi-finished product of your concept with a separate facility. So you capture the IP at that location, and then the semi-finished product is shipped to another one, taking care of the less complex parts, like, for instance, treatment and packing and distribution. So there are different ways to achieve your goals, and it all depends, of course, on the setup of your supply chain, where and how would you like to capture your IP, and of course the commercial model to the end client. Wow, we have a second poll result coming in. The choice of the moment when to start exploring co-manufacturing, when the proof of concept is almost ready. And what I like about this is almost, because when it's ready, it's fixed. It doesn't have to be frozen, of course, but I like the word almost. And the second runner-up is we can't scale up ourselves, which is interesting as well. Hopefully you have noticed that before it's critical. Before a retail client who says, okay, I would like to launch your product, how are you able to scale up? Then it's too late, obviously. So if you see, okay, we can't scale up ourselves, that could also be related to already an exploration phase with an investor up front who already has a very good idea of ultimately bringing the product and concept to the market and thinks, okay, how can we set up the supply chain to the end client? So knowing already in an early stage you can't scale up is great, because then you can consider different models. So some examples of co-manufacturing, and we already have a third poll coming up, but in the meantime, I'll just go through some points on this slide. Advantages of co-manufacturing. Of course, we explained that in a few slides before. There's no capex/investment needed, so you can free up capital for development and marketing purposes, for instance. The other one I mentioned as well is the flexibility and agility, which can increase the speed and time to market. I think also an underestimated part is the budget control and save on resources, because you can rely on the expertise and for instance, also the R&D capacity of companies who take care of a lot of processing steps for ages already, so they can already, and those are no secrets, right? They can help you with determining the right next steps in manufacturing. What will be affected when you start upscaling? Yeah, I like this one, especially the answer below, all of the above. Actually, I really mentioned topics that are really everything. Everything ticks the box when things are changing, when upscaling. More or less, for instance, if you have a B2B packaging, it's less complex then, but the packaging will be affected, of course. But indeed, everything that's mentioned here, the recipe, the quality, the ingredient sourcing, are topics that undergo certain reassessment or will be affected when you use different kind of equipment and different processing steps. You have to think things all over again. So taking that to the slide of the purpose of your concept, because that also will determine what would be the most logical step in upscaling. For instance, the positioning, right? If you're having a focus on cost, you would like to skip the consumer, you not intend to have a B2B concept, B2C concept, you stick to B2B. Your positioning, and it's a close connection with target audience as well, your positioning is more on quantities perhaps and cost. Where you might have also considerations on ingredients, right? You have specific ingredients, no allergens, no gluten, things like that. The facility that you're going to build or you use as a manufacturer has to comply with these allergen guidelines. Then, for instance, certain processing steps as well, like heating your plant-based yogurt on a stove at home is something completely different than mixing it in a tank of 5,000 liters, having a pasteurization in a continuous process, and then fill it in a fully automated filling machine. The setup is different, the speed is different, the quantities are different, so that's really relevant to take into account. And of course, the audience of the product. So if you end up retail with a fresh product of, let's say, a shelf life of 4 weeks, that means you might end up with a production schedule of every 2 days, because the retailer wants the remaining shelf life of those 4 weeks. They want 3 weeks out of that, more or less 75%. So you have 1 week of, let's say, tolerance, and then you have to build up the volume again to provide next deliveries. And out of home or B2B, for instance, on the complete right side, you might provide your product in a frozen condition to a B2B client. And if it's frozen, you are much more flexible with shelf life, for instance. So that means that you can increase the production batches, and that can lower the cost as well. So have a look at the audience, and then calculate your way back into your concept and see, okay, what is essential at commercial/industrial scale production. Of course, it's not always sunshine, right, with co-manufacturing, and we have to take care about certain challenges. And one of them pops up here, and most of the time that this pops up is intellectual property. And we saw it coming by also in this poll. A big concern is, okay, I have a fantastic concept, great innovation, and what happens when this manufacturer is seeing that? Okay, there are different ways, as I mentioned, to tackle that in a more practical and commercial way, without yet having to think of expensive lawyers to provide a solution for you. So it's a good example we have done for the company La Vie from France, for instance, where they actually applied such a split up for producing the semi-finished good at one co-manufacturer, which actually also collaborates with La Vie on a joint venture basis. And then the IP is captured in that collaboration. And the next step is shipping that product to other companies at certain hubs in Europe, where they take care of the more localized activities of slicing, marinating, dicing, packing, and distribution, for instance. Another challenge is the route of upscaling itself. So leaving the laboratory from your proof of concept, let's say, to samples, commercial size, and pilot, and industrial scale. Those are 2 or 3 steps, which in every step can change the concept and change, let's say, the way it is produced. Let me see. I have a message, 15 minutes. Wow, great. Then on volumes, SKUs, I will touch that later on. I have a specific slide on that. And the unique ingredients, I just mentioned that as an example, which you might consider, reconsider when going into the next step. Also, funding and financial leverage is important. If you think, okay, I don't have to put my money in stainless steel or my own facility, then doing business with a co-manufacturer is always free of charge. And I only have to pay once the product is done. Not always that case, right? Or some things have to be taken care of. There needs to be some investment, perhaps in raw material, packaging, supply. And of course, the manufacturer wants to have a certain financial securitization on that. Right. One of the most interesting challenges in upscaling is the challenge of MOQ or MPQ, right? It's the minimum production quantity of a producer. And that I focus now on the batch size of raw material. For instance, you have a plant-based milk, plant-based yogurt, or anything like that, or cultivated meat alternative. Manufacturers are starting off with a certain minimum batch because the equipment simply doesn't work with lower volumes. So take into account that you have the minimum volume of, for instance, 5,000 kilogram. That means that the minimum output is a certain amount of bottles, packs. When you go below that, it might result into a higher waste percentage. And in the other hand, when it's a fresh product, and then I'm referring to shelf life, if you have a fresh product and your quantities are quite low, you might consider to extend the shelf life with different processing to make sure that the production itself is more efficient. Then another interesting thing is the number of SKUs, and the SKU refers to stock keeping units, so the number of flavors, the number of pack sizes. The more SKUs you have with the same volume, the lower production volumes for every product you will have. So in some cases, our advice on the beginning of a project could also be reduce the number of SKUs from 6 to 3, get traction with these 3, make sure that you have enough volume to establish a solid production, and then see if you can increase or add flavors to that. All right, talking a lot. Are there any urgent questions in between? Willing to push the pause button for a moment, no problem. No, okay, we'll just continue. Well, previously I mentioned the peanut butter as a, quite simple example. What I would like to highlight as another challenge in the upscaling is a cost component, in this case, just simply roasted peanuts. So what happens behind? And these are just 7 aspects of what is the cost and risk behind a roasted peanut. For instance, the raw material can be influenced by crop, seasonal impact, but also the currency and the currency risk. All peanuts in the world are traded in US dollars. And if you buy it in Europe or in Asia, how to handle the currency risk. With large volumes, you can hedge the risk, for instance. What happens with the crop result? Last year, the Argentina peanut crop was almost reduced to 0. It's the biggest exporting country, and most of the export is going to Europe. So the European manufacturers had to switch to other origins, mainly US. The thing is, in the US, the particular levels of aflatoxin in their peanuts is different and mostly higher than the higher quality standards from Argentina. How to handle that? Do you have to adjust your process? Or can you adjust your recipe in such a way that your process is more resilient to fluctuations in your input raw materials, for instance? Very relevant question. So all the other topics are also to consider, right? Know what's happening behind the scenes, just as an example. 5 minutes left. Thank you, Declan. So Ending up with this summary, the third slide on challenges, everything changes. It's not a warning, not something to scare you off, because at some point you have to take that step, but takes into account that all these topics have to be reassessed, taken care of, and considered once you are building your own factory or engaging with co-manufacturers to take care of you for yourself. Something I would like to highlight in this slide, for instance, it's mentioned separately, is the shelf life extension method. You might have developed a concept in your kitchen or laboratory, which is based on the final kill step of pasteurization or sterilization. Nowadays, there are a lot of other methods of extending the shelf life without putting heat in it. It can be with pressure. It can be with electric fields. There are different ways. Also, of course, that has an influence on the recipe, on the processing, etc. And waste level. Of course, when you prepare your product in your kitchen or lab, you can use 100%, almost 100% of the output. Once you're entering into a facility with all kinds of tanks, pipelines, processing equipment, a certain amount of residue will remain in that system as waste or as a side stream. And starting with low volumes, it can easily be 10 to 15%. And some people say, okay, wow, that's a lot. Yeah, but if you increase volumes, then I come back to the MOQ slide. If you increase volumes, the waste level will go down and you have much more yield, let's put it that way, in the output of your product. Okay. Well, 3 minutes before the deadline of, let's say, the content, I hope there are some questions to address and to answer. We have some time left, right? We have 10 minutes left, correct?
Yes, we do, Arjen. Thank you so much for this excellent overview and for being able to stick to the time. I think this is important to give us a chance to engage with all of that content in a little bit more detail. There is one that really resonates with me very strongly is slide 22, when you show to us all of the different operating models. Because I think, if you don't mind, just to go back for a second, like I spoke quite a lot about consumer-centric innovation, and you spoke about IP, and the other concept that comes to mind is value-centric innovation. And when I see this slide and the opportunity that running different scenarios can give to the team that is working on a specific project, I think that really capture and crystallize the opportunity here in terms of cash flow, in terms of risk management, risk analysis, in terms of return on investment, and what are the opportunities for companies and brands to capture value. You know, what are we going to keep in-house and what are we going to outsource? So I think, you know, going through that exercise is something that I wouldn't necessarily have thought should be done rigorously or all the time. But now that you have actually put it together like that for me, I think this is paramount to a good kind of business case and business analysis to assess what the opportunities, what the challenges are, and how we can create value. And IP really comes into that opportunity as well to see where can we protect our projects and where can we collaborate. So I just really like the idea of bringing this kind of scenario planning and scenario analysis. Is it something that you do systematically when you work with your clients, Arjen?
Yes, this model, same with the TRL overview, is always used in let's say the design phase of the initial stage of our project. In part 2, we will touch more that topic of how to go through the entire food flow method. We have designed our own systematic for that, our own method. And the first step there is the design phase. And this is typically something we use as a tool to challenge also our clients. Okay, what would be your route to market and what is essential for you indeed in terms of value or cash or IP. To be adding to that, Raphaëlle, we also have the experience that really innovative products and solutions can exist of a certain sequence of processing steps, which in itself are not unique, right? You can find pasteurization, you can find a decanter or a mixing tank or whatever. But the combination of these steps, the sequence, the parameters, the ingredients, whatsoever, that makes the process unique, combined, of course, with the input raw material. And that can be a challenge to capture all these steps into one facility. Then at some point, you might consider to split the process. Okay, up till here, I want to keep it to myself. The rest can be taken care of by someone else. And that can be IP driven, can also be cost driven, can also be complexity driven, right? If you say, okay, my semi-fin is good, I would like to dehydrate that, to take all the water out. The cost of transportation is then less. The product is more condensed and concentrated. Much more value for my client, but I don't care if it's being produced in the north of Sweden and shipped to Italy, because the value in the product is high. But it's also a consideration in, okay, what steps in my process can I outsource and what do I want to keep to myself? Okay, I see a few questions. Number one, how long does it take an outsourcing process usually? I think this is really, really essential. Outsourcing, it also depends on the length, let's say, of the position where you are when it comes to the technology readiness level. What is at some point, let's say, how ready is your concept to be produced at large scale? But let's assume you have a proof of concept, benchtop samples, you're ready for that step. Such a process, depending on the complexity of the different steps, what I just mentioned, would take around 6 to 9 to 12 months. Most of the time, it can be done in 6 to 9 months. And looking at our practice, we only have to deal with the sequence of certain activities with the engagement of co-manufacturers. So if it's up to us, we can do it in 3 weeks. But it's more depending on when does the co-manufacturer have time to do a first trial. And when do they have next time for a second iteration? Okay, and then you have a final sample which is approved. That determines the final declaration of your product ingredients and claims on your product. Then would be the moment to start ordering and finalizing your design of the packaging material. And that has a certain lead times as well. So within our way of working, we have captured all these relevant steps. And well, we have condensed that into a retro planning, which we, as a plug and play book, we apply in every project, calculate back from the desired launch date, and that can be a launch window from retail or simply an end of a collaboration with an existing co-manufacturer. So we calculate back from, let's say, 6 months or 9 months, and then we see, okay, when do we have to start with what activity? But usually, to give a quick answer to you, Dolph, that can be done within 6 to 9 months. I see another question from Alison. Thank you for that. Can you elaborate on the MPQ and what frequencies does the co-manufacturing expect orders? Yeah, great question. If we have to extend the shelf life, we can produce larger batches, obviously. And for an example I mentioned as well, if you can provide your product, let's say, in a frozen state, you might as well produce only twice a year. Because if the shelf life is endless, or at least 18 months, you have sufficient time to build up stock. It has a major disadvantage as well, because you have to pay for that, right? You have to have capital to pay and for the products being produced, but it's not being sold already. So you have there a cash risk in between. The frequency of the co-manufacturing expecting orders, it's completely depending on the service level agreement that you agree. It can be that the co-manufacturer, the most usual scheme that we experience is you have a, it's a prediction period of rolling forecast of 6 months. And just before 1 month before the actual production run, it is a frozen period. for instance, or 3 weeks before the actual production run. You have a frozen period. You cannot change the volumes, perhaps with a tolerance of 10%, but you cannot change the order or the recipe or whatever. So that you have to take into account they are having slots. And for instance, on organic, it's much more complex. If you have an organic concept, a manufacturer might say, okay, I want to start every week with my organic production, because afterwards I don't have to clean the equipment to switch to conventional. Conventional, he can start producing every day. Organic is only on Monday. So that is a very typical, but also really simple example. You don't know that, right, when you enter it in this market and this manufacturing setup. But it depends on the product. All right. Other questions? Yeah, that's related to this first question I touched. And in the next seminar we have in 2 weeks, I will more clarify these steps, and also then we will touch the subject of how long it will take for every step to do that, to approach them, to find them, to organize meetings, to have clarification calls, to sign NDAs. NDA signing can take 3 weeks. If you have a corporate company, it can take 2 months, right? So it's really relevant to pick the right co-manufacturers for your concept. And such a simple thing as an NDA, that could block us really from taking next steps. If you have an idea of doing a trial in 3 months and an NDA takes 3 weeks or 3 months itself, it doesn't make sense. So we have to skip that. Our experience, but then I'm jumping ahead on the topic of part 2, is searching and finding and establishing a short list of potential co-mans ticking the most boxes can be done within 2 months, including the hassle of building this list, engaging them with clarification calls in 1, 2, and 3 sequences. Along the route, also have an NDA in place, and then have a short list presented. But 2 months is ambitious. There's, by the way, I have to make a remark there. It depends on if we already can rely on the sources that we have. For instance, recently we started with a very innovative ice cream product, and there, or plant-based yogurt, for instance, with a certain twist in ingredient or processing. But then we might rely on the existing database and resources we already have, and we can skip, let's say, the extensive market research and already select a few from the list to work on that. And if it doesn't work, we can always, let's say, escalate and expand the geography, or go back to the drawing table and reduce the briefing to find other co-manufacturers. The routes to market, let's put it that way, is different.
Thank you so much, Arjen. I think we're coming to the end of our webinar. It's been very informative. So thanks for taking the time to go through this overview around the development, but also the scale up and the importance of finding, identifying, qualifying the right partner internally or externally to carry out and plan those activities. So thank you very much for that. I think we have an opportunity now to maybe take some of those questions offline. We also have a unique chance to meet face-to-face, maybe with some of our attendees next week in Frankfurt. So hoping to catch up with you physically next week. If you're joining us in Germany, Arjen and I will be there. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And if not, we will meet again on the 28th of November for part 2, where I think we will be able to address a lot of those questions and maybe look at the results from the poll. Arjen, any final comment from your side?
Well, the biggest comment I would like to make, yes, indeed, looking forward to the event next week in Frankfurt, and do the same exercise as we did today. And a big shout out and a big thanks to the support of Siobhan Ho and Declan Godfrey on let's say, the back end, behind the scenes, to making it all possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and a big thank you
to our audience. Thank you for having me, Raphaëlle.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you to our audience as well. You know, the people are dropping off now. We're coming to the end, but we are hoping to continue our discussion next week, and if not, the week after. Thanks, everybody.
Amazing.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.